West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
All of this dropped without warning and was immediately seen for its significance as devastating evidence.
This sort of evidence is basically how prosecutors are going to tear down Trump's defense piece by piece.
That is a devastating blow for the former president.
There is no sort of, privacy exception to introducing at trial this kind of sharply incriminating information.
Golden evidence for prosecutors both in Georgia and in D.C.
It really should influence how we think about the election of 24.
There you have it, from a lot of different sources from when this broke last night. A big deal. And the truth is, the reason why you're seeing so many lawyers and other types who follow this closely react this way, what I'm going to show you right now, this is the first testimonial evidence from the Trump aides who confess. It locks in their testimony under oath. When we first got the first parts of this video last night, I mentioned that. Basically, we have heard about flipping. We've seen commitments to flip. We've seen written accounts that Mark Meadows and others may be participating. We haven't, until last night, gotten any actual video of any of that, which, by the way, is how it's supposed to be, and I'll get into that. But this is a big deal because, A, it locks them in, as I mentioned. So if somebody goes wobbly or starts spinning in a different direction, you've seen that in mafia courtroom trials and movies. Oh, maybe I didn't mean it. Well, they pull up the video that you're about to see. And two, it matters because it is the first substantive example of what these people are saying, which we didn't have before. So that is just legally important. As for the Georgia prosecutors, they know this is big. They are actually taking actions against what they are dubbing today an unauthorized leak, demanding an emergency motion to seal all this, trying to prevent any further leaks. And the journalists involved, I mentioned crediting some of the first people who broke this. We have the videos now to show you, but the first folks who had the scoop were ABC News, and the Washington Post got more of it. The revealed testimony itself shows a lot, and we're going to walk through it right now, because when you're covering this trial, the first headline is there is bad news here for those remaining defendants who are holding out. We've shown you the chart where you have key figures that face heat for the coup in Georgia and in the open Jack Smith case in D.C., where they're technically called unindicted co-conspirators, but all that means is they could get indicted later. And you have people like Giuliani and Eastman who are in that category. You see them on your screen. Well, they now face this newly revealed damning testimony from their former teammate, Sidney Powell. Now, this is a special report. We work on these all day as a team on the beat. I can tell you that. We're going to show some of these clips in some detail, not just the hottest or most sensational single quote, but I'm going to show you how this works for accuracy. And also, frankly, because we think it's interesting, we're going to go inside rooms we are never allowed in as the public or journalists. Here's Powell, under oath, reiterating her fact-free claims about how, in that desperate time where they'd already lost the election and everybody knew that, they still wanted to try to use instincts and speculation as a basis to continue the steal.
All his instincts told him he had been defrauded. that the election was a big fraud.
When you say his instincts, did he ever describe that in any way? Did he ever point to any kind of proof or evidence or anything he was getting from his other attorneys or experts?
Well, he talked about, seeing the vote totals roll backwards on the TV.
Meaning on election night?
Yeah. And the unbelievable spikes, how far ahead he was in different states at the time all the machines stopped counting, and how it should have been impossible to make up that sort of vote difference without some kind of shenanigans. Just general instincts that something wasn't right here.
I think you had said before, his instincts were that he had lost, and if it got to the point where he felt he didn't lose or that he did not win, that he would back out or bow.
No, his instinct was he had won.
Instincts, not facts or evidence. Now I'm going to show you where the prosecutors try to pin down how Powell, now a convict, and Trump, the RICO defendant, basically were on notice that they didn't have legally valid evidence. And that's what matters, because they were trying to file, remember, lawsuits or argue that there was some level of fraud, which was a lie, that would justify the very extreme measures they wanted to take. They didn't have that. They only had instincts. Listen as she tries to blur the issue. And remember, when she talks about evidence, this is someone whose evidence involved not what we would call legal evidence, but truly embarrassing and extreme claims, like a time-traveling entity helped her understand that he hadn't really lost the election. She actually emailed people about this at Fox and elsewhere. It's why Donald Trump himself sometimes diminished Powell's contribution. She's a convict now for that kind of stuff. You can say that in certain forums, but you cannot say it to the government, and you certainly can't try to change election results based on those kind of lies. Take a listen.
You had said before, if he got to the point where, the facts were telling him you've lost, he would then bow out. That was either what he said to you or the sense that you got.
Yeah, he said something very clearly to that effect.
Okay, but then on the 18th, the only real justification that he's giving you to why he's not bowing out is that his instincts tell him that he won.
That and the evidence that I'd showed him.
The evidence, of course, including the time travel. So we're really putting a lot of weight on the word evidence here. And a jury's going to hear all this and have to decide whether any of that was reliable enough, believable enough, true enough to justify the things that they were doing. And again, the DA has won every round. Nobody has gotten near a trial. Everybody has confessed. Powell is talking about Giuliani and what he said to her. And remember, she's now agreed to testify against him. Take a listen.
You remember the December 21st meeting with Phil Waldron and Mark Meadows and Rudy Giuliani that you went to?
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's the one where Rudy got really ugly. There was a big shouting match in which Rudy called me every name in the book, and I was the worst lawyer he'd ever seen in his life. There were no circumstances under which he'd work with me on anything. He called me I don't know what all. And that's pretty much all I remember about that one.
Now, that is bleeped under our standards, but it is significant to think about these two people whose lives have come together and now split. And that is where she stands with RICO defendant Giuliani. Another session, newly revealed, features Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis recounting the exact moment that a then Trump White House aide admitted the whole plan was a coup, to stay in office no matter what. All of the other stuff, theatrics, press conferences, lawsuits that were going nowhere, none of that, in their view, was part of a legitimate effort to litigate this. And if you followed our coverage all the way back to when I was on air covering it at the time, I said, you have the right to file lawsuits. You just have to respect the results. You have the right to make criticisms of the election. You just have to ultimately respect the results. By this point, you had a President-elect Biden. Everybody was going through the transition process. And at this point, in that time, this lawyer, who was a Trump loyalist at the time, learned, even as she was relaying that obvious legal fact and reality, that there was another coup plan in place. So she learns that as she explains to them that they lost, and it was, quote, essentially over.
I emphasized to him I thought that the claims and the ability to challenge the election results was essentially over. He said to me in a kind of excited tone, well, we don't care and we're not going to leave. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the boss, meaning President Trump, and everyone understood the boss, that's what we all called him. He said the boss is not going to leave under any circumstances. We are just going to stay in power. And I said to him, well, it doesn't quite work that way, you realize. And he said, we don't care.
Damning evidence for trial. I want to put up that key part here. Ellis saying, I emphasized to him, challenging of the election results was, quote, essentially over. And he, the Trump aide Scavino, says, in an excited tone, we don't care. We're not going to leave. Now, this is basically the Trump lawyer's Drake moment. Ellis saying it's over, starting to question her choices. As Drake memorably said, what am I doing? What am I doing? Well, this is what we do till it's over. And when the Trump lawyer tells them it's over, the White House replies, as the song goes, quote, but it's far from over. Well, that was the warning sign for Trump lawyer Ellis that she did not heed at the time, which is why she is now a convict. And as it happens, the same song makes another very relevant reference. Quote, I know way too many people here right now that I didn't know last year. Who the heck are y'all? Well, Drake was talking about his newfound supposed friends after becoming famous. Ellis might find the same bar applies to her supposed new friends, Giuliani and Powell. If you look at that press conference right there, Ellis has been convicted. Powell has been convicted. Giuliani awaits their damning testimony in court. All of that led Jenna Ellis down a path that was far more than over. It was a crime leading to her now very infamous confession and courtroom apology.
I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse.
Deep remorse. This is the legal process. It took a long time. There was a lot of lies and BS. There was a lot of foot drag. There was a lot of doubt about whether any of this would go anywhere. And even now there's skepticism. People say, is this enough? There should be more. What will happen to the big fish? What will happen to defendant Donald Trump? The DA made some news today saying his trial could come after the election. That's when it might only be concluded. Well, no one said the process is perfect or that it always works. But we are getting a window into how it works. And these RICO sessions, these proffer interviews are part of the nuts and bolts and the testimony, even if the DA, by her own public statement, is upset that they're out right now because that wasn't, she says, the strategy. This stuff can and will be used as key testimonial evidence against the remaining defendants, some of whom are apparently holding out. And that's why we want to show you the big picture that we've been tracking, because the DA has these 6 plots in the indictment. Ellis's guilty plea that we just talked about goes to that arrow about Georgia overturning the votes. Then there's the issues around soliciting officials. Giuliani's accused of that. Cheeseborough and Powell have guilty pleas that go to other plots, the fake electors plot, the voting data breach. We've seen convictions here. And so when you take this all together, what do we have in these secret, now revealed RICO sessions? We have exactly why the people involved in the other plots should be nervous.
It is Wednesday, the 15th of November of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special, daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Yes, I wish they would stop meddling in the hollandaise. Stay away. Okay, so how are you? It is Wednesday, the middle of the week. Some people call it hump day, because I guess you're over the hump. Yeah, whatever that means. Anyway, here we are on a Wednesday, and it looks like we're sliding irrevocably towards the weekend. Remember when the weekends were days of rest? And then the orange guy came into, our lives. He'd already been part of our lives, but, in a way that we really, really didn't anticipate. Neither did he. And everything changed. The weekends were no longer days of rest. That was when the shit was going to fly. Oh, my. And it's still flying because this guy Trump is still out there fomenting violence, fomenting a coup. They're already setting up all their brown shirts, 50-some thousand of them, and they're going to supplant all of our civil service people. Yep. What does that sound like? What does that remind you of? And then there's an argument when he comes out and calls us vermin. And we rightfully associate it with Hitler's use of the term vermin. In fact, his speeches are pretty much echoing old Adolf. And why is that? I'll tell you why. Because Santa Monica Goebbels Stephen Miller is writing the speeches. He loves the Nazis. I know. Everybody's going to say, yeah, but he's Jewish. Not anymore. He got excommunicated. Well, a form of excommunication that occurs, when the rabbi says, you are no longer part of us. Get out. And that's what happened to him. This guy has had it out for anybody not white. Like he's not going to end up at the rock pile. Well, self-hate is self-hate, right? Mm-hmm. And, a little frightening individual, and it seems that he's propagating, too. I'm not going to blame the kids all so soon, but you got Stephen Miller. And his spouse is pretty, oh boy. What a couple, huh? What a couple. All right. Looks like the libs of TikTok are up in arms over an Amanda Marcotte article in which she associates the suicide of that mayor in some southern town. Somebody had decided, it was Breitbart, outed him as, now, I've heard that he was trans, and I've heard that he was just like cross-dressing. And he had talked about cross-dressing at some point, shortly before he took his own life. But so Amanda Marcotte associated the rise of this outing to this kind of outing to be, the echoes, the resonance wave of libs of TikTok. And apparently Elon Musk's community knows, which we know is really a bunch of, Elon stands who, do Elon's bidding. And they said, she never wrote a specific article about this specific guy. Yeah, well, called for the outing and hopefully, the demise of the people that get outed because they don't fit, I don't know, whatever sexual norm that they think is normal. Ick. I don't know. I don't know about you, but when I think about other people's sex lives, you know what the first thing that comes to my mind? It's none of my damn business. I just wish that type of sentiment, I know I'm being selfish, thinking that people should think like me, but it is none of our damn business what people's sex lives are. And then, to extend it a little bit further, one's sex life does not necessarily inform what they're going to do with little kids. Right? In fact, I would probably look hard and fast at all those Christian youth ministers and the ministers themselves. Should get a lot of that. Now, is that because we're just hearing the reporting at a higher rate? Maybe. But I don't think, drag queens reading books at story hour at the public library to families is the problem. But it really does seem weird that all these pedo ministers and youth ministers and clergy are espousing a virulent right-wing rhetoric from the pulpit in spite of the fact they're not supposed to do that because they're tax exempt. But they do it anyway. And there's a high preponderance of pedophilia going on in the midst of that. And if not pedophilia, weird sex practices. Gee, I've never heard of clergy having sex with their congregants. Never. Give me a break. Gotta tell you, not too many drag queens getting caught up in some sort of weird sex scandal because they're reading at story hour at the public library. And yet this poor mayor, he was married, his wife, and I liked it. His wife dressed him up. Who cares what they do? It is none of our damn business. But libs of TikTok, oh my God, yeah. Well, they're all about dick pics, aren't they? Gotta see Hunter dick pics. Where does that come from? Well, trickle down from the Trump behavioral list of things to do to be a MAGA. Choose off Teamsters to a fight in the Senate. What kind of senators do we have now? You know? It's not the Democratic senators. This is what the thing I really get mad about with media. They color all of Capitol Hill as having this terrible violence that's percolating, and yet they won't say it's coming from one party. Man. Give me a break. Oh, well, you said punch the Nazis. Yeah, well, you know what? That's a rhetorical flourish that we've been using since, well, the 30 Nazi period. Come on. There's all sorts of different punching of the Nazis. The one I like the most is bankrupting them. That's always fairly effective. So we have a problem with violence in the halls of Congress. And it's coming from one party. Let us report that. Okay. All right. Well, when you got the Russian psyops going on and you tried to impeach Mayorkas for I can't figure out why. Because they're confiscating more fentanyl than Trump ever thought about. He didn't even care. They're apprehending terrorists, and the MAGAs say that that's bad. So we got to impeach Mayorkas? Well, he's giving testimony today about not only cyber threats from hostile foreign powers like Vlad and Xi, etc. Let's not forget about the Iranian Guard either, Red Guard, whatever they're called. Let's not forget about them. That is not only coming from online asymmetrical warfare, but actual building up of arms and moving around of troops, etc., etc., etc. And for some reason, the MAGA Republicans they deny it, but they have some sort of weird alignment with what Vlad says. Not only Adolf, but Vlad. And they wanted to impeach Mayorkas right in the midst of all this turmoil? Okay, sounds suspicious to me. All right, well, that being said, we do have a bit of a curated show for you today, so why don't we get into it, since we're running just a tad behind here. And yes, at the top here on the Bistro Cafe on this fabulous Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, a Trump conviction is more likely as aides confess to the RICO prosecutors. And who leaked that? Yeah, we know who did. Witness intimidation coming from one side. On the rest of the menu, a Detroit police corporal accused of shooting 3 photojournalists with rubber bullets while they covered the 2020 George Floyd protests has been ordered to stand trial. A new Democratic-leaning congressional district in Alabama is a rare opportunity in the deep red state to flip a Republican seat in the battle for control of the House of Representatives. And Kansas officials evacuated the Secretary of State's building after it received a letter with a suspicious substance. Of course, the Secretary of State in Kansas takes care of the voting. Maybe they had a little delay in delivering the suspicious substance envelopes that other electoral offices and state houses received right around the election. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Putin approved new restrictions on media coverage ahead of the March presidential elections, and the new owners of Univision canceled all of Biden's campaign ad buys after a late-night meeting with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. You know, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, off to the left is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And you know what to do. You could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio if you could send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month. And that really helps us pay our bills and all the other costs associated with running this powerhouse of resistance. So we thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Facebook, you can do so by going to @Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those, except for Facebook. Kelly takes care of that. Thank you, guys. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, wherever, @Justice Putnam. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, where you can find the articles that gives us such grand inspiration here at the salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. You could follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. And did I say Stitcher? You can't find it on Stitcher anymore, you know? A decade of saying that, it's hard to break. But you can't find it, our show or any shows, any podcasts on Stitcher anymore. And you know why. Okay. Let us now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. And, I guess I didn't get the tab up. And the article is out of the Associated Press by Corey Williams. A Detroit police corporal accused of shooting 3 photojournalists with rubber pellets while they covered protests against police brutality has been ordered to stand trial. Daniel Debineau is scheduled to be arraigned on the 28th of this month in Wayne County Circuit Court on felonious assault charges, the county prosecutor's office said yesterday, Tuesday. Shortly after midnight on May 31st of 2020, in downtown Detroit, MLive.com photojournalist Nicole Hester and 2 independent photojournalists, Seth Harold and Matthew Hatcher, encountered Debineau and 2 other officers. each of the photojournalists was wearing press credentials, identified themselves as news media, and raised their hands as they asked to cross the street. Prosecutor Kim Worthy said at the time, Debineau, dressed in riot gear, struck all three with rubber bullets that inflicted bruises and other injuries. The photojournalists were covering the protest in downtown Detroit, which was sparked by the March 25th, 2020 death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Then, Detroit Police Chief James Craig suspended Debineau. A 36th District Court judge dismissed the case at the officer's preliminary examination in 2021, ruling that a state statute gave Debineau immunity from prosecution. That was appealed by the prosecutor's office, and a Wayne County Circuit judge reversed the lower court's decision, which was appealed by the defense. Last March, Michigan's Court of Appeals affirmed the circuit court ruling and remanded the case back to the U.S. District Court in Detroit. The appeals court determined the statute provides a legal defense at trial instead of immunity, the prosecutor's office said. And Debineau's attorney said last night that police officers are put in impossible situations. Excuse me. Cops are not supposed to shoot journalists, especially when they're wearing visible media credentials. Kim Chandler of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The creation of a Democratic-leaning congressional district in Alabama has drawn a sprawling field of candidates as Democrats eye a rare opportunity in the deep red state to flip a Republican seat in the battle for control of the House of Representatives. The new district, created by court order, is viewed as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Democrats looking to win higher office in a state where Republicans currently dominate statewide positions by illegal gerrymanders, by the way. The outcome of the Alabama race, with control of the U.S. House of Reps on the line, will be closely watched. And with ongoing court challenges to congressional maps in Georgia, Louisiana, and elsewhere, some hope the Alabama race will be a harbinger of Democrats making inroads in the Deep South. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Office of Kansas's top elections official received suspicious mail yesterday, Tuesday, prompting the evacuation of its building near the State House for the rest of the day. The incident occurred less than a week after election officials in over a dozen states received threatening mail, some containing the potentially dangerous opioid fentanyl. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation, taking the lead in the case, did not provide further details about the mail sent to the Kansas Secretary of State's office. The KBI is working with the Highway Patrol, the State Fire Marshal's Office, and the State Department of Health and Environment, spokesperson Melissa Underwood said in an emailed statement. She said authorities evacuated the building, which also houses the Kansas Attorney General's office, out of an abundance of caution. An officer inside the building yesterday afternoon said it was still being secured. 2 people who worked there went to the main entrance to have officers retrieve items left behind in the evacuation. They declined to comment afterward. Television crews saw Topeka Fire Department hazardous material teams entering the building shortly after it was evacuated. They were gone by the afternoon. In June, dozens of Republican officials in Kansas, Montana, and Tennessee received threatening letters containing white powder, though tests did not detect toxins and no injuries were reported. Authorities have yet to announce arrests. Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab is a Republican who has pushed back against baseless theories about the 2020 election being stolen. In other states last week, the political leanings whoever sent the threatening mail were unclear, except for the ones that said they wanted to stop the election. What party wants to stop the election? Please. All right, let us now go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, The King's Other Half. On election night, Democrats in Mississippi came within a few points of winning the governorship. Did the fact that their candidate was Elvis Presley's cousin have anything to do with that? Can't say, but with last year's Baz Luhrmann picture, and now a biopic about Elvis's wife, Priscilla, it's clear that the fascination with Elvis continues. Having said that, though, the Sofia Coppola adaptation of Priscilla Presley's memoir Elvis and Me, while in the universe, is very much Priscilla's story. Notable characters from other Presley sagas, like Colonel Parker, are relegated on screen to an undifferentiated gaggle of hangers-on played by extras. The story picks up in the late 1950s while the king is fulfilling his military service in Germany and meets the then 14-year-old Priscilla. She's infatuated with him, as was about every 14-year-old girl at the time. However, here, arguably the most famous man in the world is infatuated with her, and the movie is mostly a nuanced and revealing narrative of the pair's relationship. Elvis skyrockets, Priscilla grows up. Elvis spirals, Priscilla gains agency, and eventually ends things. Relative newcomer Kaylee Spaney does wonderful work here, showing strength rather than victimhood in a relationship that, even granted some leeway for historical and cultural differences, seems abusive. In late 2022, Variety and other outlets made public some emails between Coppola and the late Lisa Marie Presley, indicating that she had some serious issues with the depictions of her parents in a script she reviewed. No word if that was the final script, and Priscilla herself is an executive producer here, but liberties are not. Priscilla is a well-done film that seems thematically in line with much of Coppola's other work. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to this edition of PCD Soundbites. I'm Karen Ngowe, filling in for your host, Latoya Simmons. Current guidelines recommend adults get at least 2.5 hours of moderate-intensity aerobic activity a week, like brisk walking. But many Americans don't get enough physical activity to meet this guideline, which can lead to chronic disease and premature death. Joining me today is Dr. Susan Carlson, a lead epidemiologist in CDC's Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity. We'll be discussing her research, which aims to estimate the percentage of U.S. deaths attributed to inadequate levels of physical activity. Thank you for being here, Susan.
Thank you for inviting me, Karen.
Susan, give us a brief overview of your study.
As Karen stated, the current aerobic physical activity guideline recommends that adults participate weekly in at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, or its equivalent for substantial health benefits. The health benefits include such things as lowering the risk of premature death, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancers, and depression. In our study, we first examined what influence physical activity levels below the current guideline have on premature mortality, and we wanted to look at whether this association differed by age. The second purpose was really to estimate the percentage of deaths that are attributable to levels of physical activity that are inadequate to meet the current guideline.
What did your research reveal about the association between inadequate physical activity and premature death among American adults?
So in a nationally representative sample of U.S. adults, we found that adults with levels of physical activity inadequate to meet current guidelines had an increased risk of premature death. Overall, we found that 8.3% of deaths were attributed to inadequate levels of physical activity. Our findings suggest that if you increase adults' physical activity levels to meet the current guidelines, this is likely one way to reduce the risk of premature death in the United States.
What did you find when you looked at this association in different age groups?
We did not find a significant association between physical activity level and mortality in adults aged 25 to 39. However, for those aged 40 to 69 and 70 or older, we found that not meeting the guideline was associated with an increased risk of premature mortality.
How did these findings compare to previous similar studies?
We found that our estimates were similar or slightly lower when comparing to similar studies that have examined this association. In general, our estimates of the percent of deaths attributable to inadequate levels of physical activity is not practically different from other studies.
Do you think researchers have become better at estimating the percentage of deaths attributed to inadequate physical activity?
Estimating the percentage can be challenging. Many of the previous studies that have provided these estimates have done so by combining estimates across different sources. This can really bias results, especially if there are differences in the populations or if the physical activity measure differs. When you use a survival analysis conducted in a single population, which is what we did in this study, you can overcome a lot of these biases and improve your estimates. Facilitating the linking of CDC survey data from systems like the National Health Interview Survey to mortality data can really help researchers explore these issues.
How do you think this research can be used to help get adults moving and reduce the risk of premature death associated with inadequate physical activity?
So we found in this study that a significant portion of deaths were attributed to lower levels of physical activity. By estimating the public health burden of low levels of physical activity, this can be important for setting research and program priorities and for public health planning at the national, state, and local level. Ultimately, individuals make the decision to be active. However, this decision can be made easier by programs and policies that provide opportunities for physical activity and by making communities more activity-friendly. By working collaboratively across different sectors, communities across the nation can help to increase physical activity levels and potentially reduce the risk of premature death.
Thank you, Susan. You can read her study, Percentage of Deaths Associated with Inadequate Physical Activity in the United States, online at cdc.gov/PCD. The findings and conclusions in this report are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the official position of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family.
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing
a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. This past year, party activists in several states proposed closing their primaries to anyone not registered with that party. Why? A fear of crossover voting to derail extreme candidates seems to be the short answer. Polarization has driven millions of voters of both parties to become independent, but they may be too moderate for the party faithful. A recent proposal to close Republican primaries in New Hampshire cited the influence of unaffiliated voters on the outcome of Republican primaries. Wyoming, Texas, and Ohio have or are considering legislation requiring party affiliation to vote in a primary. Colorado Republicans have also been discussing ways to opt out of the state's primary system. Colorado Public Radio cited one state Republican leader as saying, "The current unconstitutional open primary scheme allows for Democrats and other left-wing groups to interfere in our primary nomination outcomes so they can weaken our general election prospects." There's little evidence that crossover voting can flip the outcome of an election, but there is growing evidence that open primaries do encourage candidates to be less extreme in primary races when they must appeal to the middle, not just to the party activists who show up for a closed primary. That may be why fringe activists want to slam the door and why pro-voter groups advocate for primary access for all voters. We have more at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Deal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. That was the day that federal agents stormed the offices of the industrial workers of the world in New York City. They were looking for evidence connecting the organization to radical communists or anarchists. The ransacked office was part of the infamous Palmer raids, when Attorney General Alexander Palmer responded to the growing Red Scare hysteria by raiding the offices of leftist organizations and arresting thousands. Hundreds of immigrants to the United States were deported during the raids without legal due process. The 1917 Russian Revolution had stoked fears about a spreading communist threat. Newspaper headlines helped to drum up public panic. A week before the IWW raid, a headline on the front page of the Evening World, published in New York City, declared, "Reds in U.S. plotted revolution, deportation for all radicals." The day after the IWW raid, a Washington Post headline read, "Law to crush Reds." Writing in 1920, Attorney General Palmer warned, quote, "The chief appeal communism makes is to the worker. If they can lure the wage earner to join their own gang of thieves, if they can show him that he will be rich if he steals, So far, they have succeeded in betraying him to their own criminal course. Palmer went on to describe how communists had, quote, stirred discontent, caused irritating strikes, and infected our social ideas with the disease of their own minds and their unclean morals. Palmer's references to workers and irritating strikes demonstrate that he perceived the labor movement as part of the communist threat. Anti-communist hysteria took its toll on the most radical elements of the U.S. labor movement, especially the IWW.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low 60s, a bit warmer than yesterday. Cloudy conditions with a bit of rain still falling. Partly cloudy throughout the day with winds light and variable. And rain should be stopping sometime around the afternoon. Partly cloudy overnight with lows in the low 40s, winds light and variable. Then sunny skies tomorrow. Highs once again in the low 60s, winds light and variable, and looks like we may have a respite from rain until about Saturday. So a couple of days. Pollen is still rated as none here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 38 parts per million. And that daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.92 inches. Visibility is at 5 miles. And relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 51 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 53 and mostly cloudy with an advisory for heavy wind. Rome is 66 and fair. Bagram is 48 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 48 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 72 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 51 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 58 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 and mostly cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 55 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. At the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Russian President Vladimir Putin has approved changes to the law that governs presidential elections, putting new restrictions on media coverage, local news agencies reported yesterday, Tuesday. The changes come ahead of the election to be held in March, in which Putin, who has ruled Russia for the last 24 years, is expected to seek a new 6-year term. Putin, age 71, has not declared whether he will run, saying he will announce that only after the parliament formally sets the election date. Under the amendments that he approved, only journalists contractually employed by registered media outlets will be allowed to cover election commission meetings, potentially barring freelancers and independent journalists. The changes also include barring any coverage of the commission's actions on military bases or in areas under martial law without prior permission of regional and military authorities. In addition, the changes prohibit campaign activity on blocked resources. Under an intensifying crackdown on opposition and information flow, Russia has banned an array of websites and services, including Facebook and Instagram, although many people use VPNs to circumvent the blockage.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Michael Scherer and Josh Dawsey of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. When Trump ran for re-election in 2020, his campaign called Univision, the nation's most influential Spanish-language network, a leftist propaganda machine and a mouthpiece of the Democrat Party. We shall treat them accordingly, top advisors promised. 3 years later, Trump is treating Univision and its new corporate owners like long-lost friends. I guess it's not your Jorge Ramos Univision anymore, eh? He hosted a trio of its new executives at Mar-a-Lago last week during an hour-long Univision interview that was notable for its gracious tone, starting with a question about how well he is doing among Latino voters in early general election polling. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a friend of one of the executives, helped arrange the interview and was also in the room. All you have to do is look at the owners of Univision. They're unbelievable entrepreneurial people, and they like me, Trump said in response to the question about Latino voters. The reversal has shocked Democrats, who are preparing a massive ad campaign to brand Trump as hostile to Latino interests, and some journalists inside Univision who think that the past week has demonstrated the heavy hand of their new corporate bosses. The Mexican media company Grupo Televisa, which has long fostered a close relationship with Mexican political leaders. Corrupt, right-wing Mexican political leaders? Well, they merged with Univision in 2021. The Democratic alarm spiked further 2 days later when Univision advertising reps told the Biden campaign that spots already purchased to run during the Trump interview in Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Florida had been canceled owing to a heretofore unannounced policy about opposition advertising in single-candidate interviews. Univision also canceled a booking with Biden's Hispanic media director, Maca Casado, to respond to the Trump interview after it aired on the network's late news broadcast. And that was according to people familiar with details, who, like others, spoke on the condition that no one named them for this article because they were not authorized to speak publicly. They always say that. Not since 2004, when former President George W. Bush outperformed expectations among Latino voters, has the Spanish-speaking population been up for grabs in a presidential contest, according to early polling? Well, you know, when you go on Spanish language media and lie using anti-Semitic tropes like Joe and Kamala are part of a cabal of Soros-funded communists drinking baby blood? I'm serious. Okay, well, we have our work cut out for us, and I suppose Telemundo could help. I don't know. Maybe we should hire Jorge Ramos and let him maybe interview Trump on occasion. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.